Welcome back to the Impact Storytelling podcast. I'm your host sabinemprobst, and today I'm joined by marine biologist, dive master, freediver, commercial drone pilot, and ocean advocate Kat Mason. Kat focuses her research on the elasmobranch and conservation, having worked from the Caribbean to the Maldives and Southeast Asia, using baited remote cameras, drones, and non-invasive tags to monitor a wide range of shark and ray species. She's passionate about the ocean, nature, travel, and outdoor adventure, which has inspired her photography and drone videography. She spent the last year working as a project coordinator, drone pilot, and scientific diver in Thailand for her co-founded project, Aerial Recon Recovery Initiative. Welcome, Kat. I'm happy to have you in a podcast and talk with you about sharks and your conservation work. Your journey into science started at Plymouth University with a bachelor's degree in environmental science. That's pretty amazing. That's also where my journey into ocean conservation started. During my time at Plymouth Uni, I created my first ocean conservation film. You then studied for your master's in marine biology at the University of Algarve, Portugal, gaining 95% for your thesis, which investigated the drivers of abundance for reef sharks in the Cayman Islands, and receiving Portugal's Merit Scholarship Award, awarded to the top students in the country. That's really impressive. I would love to hear more about that project. What inspired you to pursue a career in shark ecology?
Hi, Sabine. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. It's great to be chatting with you. Well, I spent time as a child in Florida, which I think completely shaped the path of my life. The wildlife there was completely abundant, and that's where I really fell in love with the ocean. So just off of the beach, you could see shoals of stingrays, sharks swimming around the pier, and when you'd go paddleboarding, you could see kind of pods of dolphins. So I knew then I wanted to spend as much time as I could in nature, doing whatever I could to kind of keep these animals thriving, and to help those that weren't. So at 16 years old, I volunteered at an eco ranch and tropical animal rescue centre, which kind of solidified that choice. I absolutely loved it. Going into uni, I was initially dissuaded by quite a few people on following the career path of marine biology, mainly due to the difficulties of actually continuing the work in this sector. It's pretty difficult to find a job sometimes. So instead, I actually studied environmental science at Plymouth, which I loved. I have absolutely no regrets about. I think it was super useful to learn all about the environment as a whole and how everything interlinks. But in my final year, I took all the marine modules. I kind of fell in love all over again. And I ended up becoming certified as a HSE commercial scuba diver. So I think I'd already kind of subconsciously decided that was the route I was going to go. And it also wasn't really until my studies that I'd understood the plight of sharks and just how much they were threatened. And during my dissertation research in Indonesia for 6 weeks, we didn't see a single shark, and that kind of highlighted the problems that are out there. From then on, after graduating, my first role was with Lamave in the Philippines as a whale shark research assistant. And I absolutely fell in love with field work, getting to spend every morning in the water with the whale sharks. And weirdly enough, I loved the data management side of it as well. So that was kind of, no turning back after that.
Yeah. That sounds really amazing. And what are some challenges that you face as a shark ecologist?
So I think the main challenge, and a huge challenge, is convincing governments and policymakers to take the issue seriously, and to allocate sufficient funds towards these conservation efforts. So governments and massive corporations as well, they're prioritizing short-term economic gain over the long-term health of the environment. And shark fishing is a widespread global problem. It's driven by the demand for shark fins and other shark products. And despite the massive impact it's having on ecosystems, governments are turning a blind eye to the illegal and unsustainable fishing practices. So, yeah, that is absolutely a massive issue. I think something else that's prevalent in the field is, as much as many of us want to dedicate ourselves entirely to shark conservation, the financial side of things, it does make it difficult at times to make ends meet and to earn a living. So, some of us are forced to constantly look for new jobs, having to cover flight costs, gain new qualifications, buy equipment, all out of our own pockets. And that sometimes isn't sustainable for some of us. And then finally, I think one of the most frustrating obstacles I've found is the misogyny and gender bias that persists in the scientific field. And as a woman in marine science, there are times when my work or contributions or qualifications or those of my female colleagues have been dismissed, overlooked, simply because we are women, which can be demoralizing, but it's definitely something that we need to keep challenging and dismantling.
That's three quite sad things. Yeah. With the laws we talk later a little bit about, I was unaware that still that women in science are not taken so seriously. I knew, like, in higher position that there are mostly men, but I know so many amazing women in science, and it's really sad that the work isn't taken seriously, and I hope that's going to change in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with all female teams, tagging sharks in the field. It's incredible. Yeah. It's so great to be working with these amazing women. And yeah, I hope that things do, continue to change for that.
Yeah, me too. And you have worked in places from Southeast Asia to the Maldives. And one of your projects was with the Department of Environment in the Cayman Islands. Can you share what shark research project you were working on there?
So the time that I spent in the Cayman Islands was with the Department of Environment and their shark research project out there. And I was undertaking my master's thesis research. And the time I spent with the department and with my mentor, Johanna, was absolutely invaluable. I learned so much, so many different research techniques, including BRUVs. So these are baited remote underwater video cameras. We were using satellite and acoustic tags, all of which I think we'll probably discuss a bit further on about the different techniques that we use. Scuba diving surveys and citizen science projects, where the project was using members of the public's recordings of sharks to help with their data. So as a whole, I learned so much also about what it takes to run a research project. And I'm so incredibly thankful for my time there.
It definitely sounds like an amazing experience. And you sent me a video that we can take a look at. And then maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what we're seeing there and how the research worked. So what do we see here? What is there at the end of the pole?
Yes, so we're using a GoPro camera here, and it's attached to a rig. And we can see that there is a bag, and that bag is filled with bait. So cut up mackerel fish, for example. And what happens there is the scent from the bait is released into the water column, and it attracts shark species that are using the area. So what they'll do is they'll come and check out what's going on, and the camera records what species are there. So it gives us a really good insight into what kind of sharks are actually using the area. And it also gives us an indication, as we can see here, it's a juvenile tiger shark. So it's a very small individual. And that's super interesting because we wouldn't have known that juvenile tiger sharks were using that area. I think that's a hammerhead there. So yeah, it's giving us really good insight into the sharks that are utilising the areas around the Cayman Islands.
Oh, that's very cool. There are so many different kinds of sharks.
Yes, there's quite a variety of different shark species, actually, that use the island's coral reefs.
And how long did you leave the GoPro down there?
So you can... It really depends on what you're trying to look at. But we aimed for between 1 to 2 hours because it gives the shark individuals time to smell the bait, because obviously the bait needs to travel through the water. Then it gives the shark time to actually swim towards the bait. And then we want to leave the camera down for as long as possible to see as much as we can and to collect as much data as we can. So we'd add an extra battery onto the camera to keep the GoPro from filming for up to 2 hours.
And in late 2022, you did a little bit something different. You have dedicated your time to your co-founded research project, ARI, using aerial monitoring via drones to survey the coastlines of 2 islands in Thailand for ghost gear and marine megafauna, working with local stakeholders to restore the local marine environment. How did you get this idea and how does this project work?
So the initial idea came from a now friend of mine, a PhD student who'd grown up on Koh Phangan, which is an island in Thailand. And she'd witnessed the degradation of her home reefs and the almost complete disappearance of marine wildlife. So she ended up speaking to a friend of hers who'd previously used drones to survey different reefs to locate fishing gear. And that person was actually a colleague of mine from when we were working in the Maldives together as part of the first drone program within the Maldives, Melissa Chile's project, a super cool project looking at ocean plastics and how that travels through atolls. So they were basically exploring the potential to launch a pilot project to study the impacts of abandoned, lost and discarded fishing gear in Thailand. And so initially I was asked to join as a marine biologist and drone pilot. It kind of snowballed from there. Our fundraising for the initial 2-week pilot project was successful and we ended up securing more. So we received grants through Experiment and the Ocean Conservancy. And this allowed us to completely dive into the project. We expanded it to a full-scale 2-island project for a year, including the island of Koh Tao as well. So we developed our initial plan from simple drone surveying and analysis to encompass beach and reef cleanups. We involved local fishing communities, research groups, dive centres and government departments, as well as developing plans for a net recycling and repurposing scheme and educating school and university students as well. So our methods, essentially, we would conduct drone surveys around the islands to cover as much coastline and reef as possible. Then we would have to sift through thousands and thousands of images to identify any anomalies, so fishing gear. And we'd lift the GPS coordinates of these items. And the same goes for marine wildlife. We found that drones were a very useful tool in that environment to locate sharks, rays, and turtles. So we'd also gather data on what we were seeing there. And in terms of the fishing gear, we'd liaise with the local groups to go recover that gear on cleanup dives and snorkels. And some of these nets were vast aggregate nets, completely entangled on the reef with fish and crabs entangled inside. So they were posing massive threats to the local environment. So the data, it allowed us to devise an island-wide plan to mitigate this problem and in the short term manage the ongoing issue of ghost gear, whilst working for the long-term plan of understanding where the gear was coming from and implementing a net recycling scheme once those nets were recovered.
Wow, that sounds really amazing. And once you had the pictures, did you then go out there and get the nets?
Exactly. So we would, we'd find the GPS coordinates from the image, and then we kind of make a plan to pick up as many nets as possible in a small area. We'd go out with snorkel boats, fishing boats, dive boats, and we'd work with our teams to remove as much as possible.
And I imagine if you found big nets, it was quite hard to get it into the boats. Did you have like specific technique to do that, or could you not use the big nets, or did you cut it up, or how did that work?
Yeah, honestly, it depended on the net and the environment. Of course, it's very different if you're in 2 meters of water as opposed to 30 meters.
Yeah.
But basically, we'd work in teams. We'd have a plan going in, obviously to make sure that we were all as safe as possible as well with our dive equipment. And we'd work on releasing various parts of the nets with knives and scissors. On the dives, we'd use lift bags with trained members of the team to basically bring up separated parts of the nets. There would often be 20, 30 of us on the smaller, shallower net cleanups in order to be able to lift these nets onto the boats. And we'd have all the local fishing community there with us, helping us to remove it, because obviously it's not doing their fish stocks any good either.
Yeah. And then once you had it out, was there often like algae on it or marine life in it?
Yes, so unfortunately a lot of the nets have been there, it looked like, for many, many years. So it was completely algae encrusted. We tried to remove only the sections that didn't have any live coral on it, for example. We want to kind of leave that in the ocean as a living environment. A lot of the nets we were removing had small fish species in it, crabs. So we tried to remove as many of them as possible. Some of these nets had obviously been there for a number of years.
Yeah. So when I think of ghost nets that have been in the water for a long time, in my head there is a lot of algae and other materials on it, and it seems to be hard to get it clean, to properly recycle it. Did you find that also to be true, that there is a lot of things on it? And how did you try to recycle it?
Yeah, as you say, the nets that we're removing that have been there for longer than a few months are covered in algae, and that does make the job a lot harder. A lot of the groups that are recycling items such as fishing nets, they can only recycle clean nets. So part of the process was seeing if we could clean it, basically remove as much as we could manually before sending it off to recycling centres. But it's absolutely something that does need more development and research, because a lot of these nets we're finding we're not going to be able to clean to a high enough standard. So that absolutely does need development. Yeah.
And you said you also worked with the communities. What role does public education and local engagement play in shark conservation?
It's absolutely crucial to our efforts. It's firstly so important to shift perceptions. So thanks to the media, movies like Jaws, sharks are generally portrayed as man-eating monsters.
Yeah.
education helps combat this, especially if we're going to highlight their importance ecologically, and actually explain the risk to humans in context, because really they're not much of a risk to us.
No.
So when we engage with local communities, particularly fishing communities that have generally been taught that sharks are to be feared, and all sharks, we're empowering them to become stewards of their environment, to want to protect where they live and the reefs that they fish on. So, for example, in the Philippines with Lamave, the local communities we were working directly with held such fear for sharks, including tiny little bamboo sharks, which are of zero threat to humans. So we were able to convince them that they could call us whenever they spotted one of these sharks in their mangroves. And instead of killing it, we would explain to them, we would educate them about what these sharks do and how they eat, and we'd actually go and release these sharks with them, so that they understood that there is really no threat. So I think changing perceptions is absolutely vital. And educational programs can also teach other things like sustainable fishing practices, alternative livelihoods, and explaining kind of the long-term benefits of healthy shark populations to their local ecosystem, which will in turn help them when they're fishing. I'd say to the general public, awareness campaigns can educate people on the impact of, again, consuming shark meat and other products. And so when we're informing consumers about this, then the demand for these products can hopefully decrease, and that will again have a knock-on effect, reducing pressures on these shark populations.
And I would love to share some more information about sharks, as they are often misunderstood, as you already said, because of the media. And I feel like most people don't realize how many different shark species there are and how incredible they are. There are over 500 described shark species known, if I am not mistaken. And they can look and behave quite differently. Can you talk a little bit about the stigma of sharks and some different kinds of sharks and their way of living and their behavior and diet?
Yes, so sharks have often been misunderstood and vilified, and again, aggressive man-eaters, monsters. But in reality, shark attacks on humans are incredibly rare. Most species are very shy and avoid humans altogether. So shark encounters are often a case of misidentification. A splashing surfer, for example, can look like an animal such as a seal, and some sharks will investigate with a little bite, and obviously that's not great for the surfer. Some species don't even have teeth, like the whale shark or the basking shark. They're filter feeders, so there's no need for them to use their teeth. This stigma in general is detrimental to conservation efforts because people are less inclined to protect something that they see as dangerous. So, as you say, there are over 500 known species of sharks currently, but these vary widely in terms of size, habitat, and behavior. So we have the whale shark, which is the largest fish in the ocean, and that reaches lengths of up to 19 meters or 62 feet. To the dwarf lantern shark, which can fit in the palm of your hand. And more recently discovered is the American pocket shark, which reaches 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches. And it actually secretes a luminescent substance from small glands under its pectoral fins, and they use that to hunt prey. It's very random. So sharks, very cool. Yeah. So sharks occupy almost every marine environment. Some are solitary hunters, like great white sharks, whilst the hammerheads are known to be swimming in schools a lot of the time. Some sharks are ram ventilators, so they need to keep swimming in order to breathe by taking in water that passes over their gills, whilst others are buccal pumpers like nurse sharks, and they can actually actively pump water over their gills, and that allows them to stop swimming and actually rest on the seafloor. Diet can vary, so some are opportunistic, like tiger sharks. They'll eat fish, squid, turtles, seabirds, whatever. Others are filter feeders, consuming plankton, whilst the odd species, like the bonnet-head shark, has actually been observed to eat seagrass, which I think was quite surprising.
A vegan shark.
Exactly.
Amazing. And I think the reproduction is also different between different shark species, right?
Yes, that's correct. So there are 3 main ways that sharks can reproduce. So they have oviparity, which is egg laying. So the eggs are in tough cases called mermaid's purses, and they attach to seagrass or coral, and the shark actually develops outside the mother's body. So we can see that in bamboo sharks. Then there's viviparity, which is live birth. So embryos develop inside the mother and the young are born fully formed. So we see that in bull sharks, hammerheads and tiger sharks. And then we have ovoviviparity. And that is where the eggs hatch inside the mother. So they develop in a yolk sac, and actually in some species, individuals can consume their siblings while still inside the mother. And this has been seen in makos and great white sharks.
When you mean consume, do you mean they eat it inside the mother? Okay.
They do, yeah, that has been known.
Must be quite hungry then.
Apparently so.
And how long does it usually take for a shark to develop?
So in terms of developing
until they are born?
Until they're born. Yeah, so that completely depends on the species as well. So some will take a few months, some will take a lot longer. So yeah, it really depends on the species.
And I have some pictures here that you and I took. Maybe we can look through them a bit and you can tell us a little bit about the specific shark, what it's named, how it usually behaves, where it lives. Let's start with this one here. That's a photo you took.
So this is a blue shark. I took this in the Azores archipelago off of the coast of Portugal. So these sharks I found to be very curious when they're in the water. They're not really very fearful of humans. They're very curious and they want to kind of see what you're up to. These live in the Atlantic. You can see them off the coast of the UK and Europe.
They're not that big, right? I felt like when I saw them in Spain that they weren't like that big. They're quite slim and fast as well.
Yes, they're very slim. Their body shapes are very fusiform, so they're pretty efficient hunters. But yeah, they're not that large.
And the next shark here I have not seen in Europe anywhere, only in warmer waters.
Yes, so these aren't really in British or European waters. This is the nurse shark, and this photo was taken in the Maldives. So they have very rough skin.
Yeah.
Sharks have dermal denticles on their skin, which is basically a bunch of tiny little teeth, which make them very fast swimmers. It reduces drag. So these sharks in particular have a very rough skin. They are also not shy at all. They will come up and check you out and bump you. Exactly. They have no fear.
Yeah. I was actually doing a night dive a couple of weeks ago with these sharks, and I was holding my camera and one of them bumped right into my hand, so I could also feel how their skin feels like.
Right? You don't have a choice in that. It just
no,
happens.
I didn't even see it coming. I was looking for it, and next to me was another diver, and it just came in between us.
And just
there were so many
yeah.
of them. They were just all bumping into us, and we couldn't even go away. We didn't touch them, but they did touch us.
Exactly. Nothing you can do about that.
Yeah. And here we have a tiger shark, one that is quite feared from most people.
Exactly. It has a pretty bad reputation for being aggressive and for attacking humans.
Yeah.
But I've found that during my experiences with them, I've not found that really. They kind of mind their own business. They don't really bother you. They're not bothered at all that you're there. I think obviously there are cases of mistaken identity in unclear, turbid water. But yeah, these guys generally feed on anything that they can find. So yeah, seabirds, invertebrates, fish, marine mammals, all sorts.
I feel like their snout is quite wide. When I saw one, and there was also a little one where I think when they are smaller, their stripes are not quite there yet, right? It's more like dotty.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it reminded me more of a whale shark than of a tiger shark when I saw it at first glance, like a really tiny whale shark.
Yeah, their stripes definitely develop over time, but I think it's one of the most beautiful patterns that you can see.
Definitely is. And we have one photo here that I took of a lemon shark.
Yes, so these guys, they definitely look a little more scary than your average shark. But they have a varied diet as well. So they eat small bony fish, but they're also known to feed on smaller sharks, rays, skates, but also squid, octopus, crabs. So they're not too fussy as well. But they actually exhibit like ambush predator behavior. So they use mangroves and seagrass beds as hunting grounds. So they take advantage of their environment to ambush their prey.
What are the animals around the shark? That also might be interesting to some people that sometimes see it with sharks and rays.
Yeah, so these are remoras or suckerfish, and they have a unique relationship with sharks and other large marine animals. So they basically suction themselves on to the side of the shark and hitch a ride, basically. It's free energy. They don't have to swim. But it can be pretty annoying for the shark as well to have to carry around this extra weight, this extra drag. But it can be a beneficial relationship. So remoras generally feed on parasites and dead skin from the host animal, so from the shark, which helps maintain a good health for the shark. So yeah, whilst they are pretty annoying for the shark, there are benefits.
Okay. Here we have a whale shark.
I think these are one of my favorite sharks that I have been in the water with. They are the largest fish in the ocean, and they love their plankton. They're filter feeders, so they basically take in large gulps of water and they filter out the plankton. But they can also eat smaller fish like sardines and anchovies. They are found in tropical waters such as Southeast Asia, but also warm temperate oceans as well. And they are absolutely not aggressive. They are very sweet creatures. They basically, all they're interested in is feeding.
They can also be quite fast, right? I always thought they were so slow. I think I only had seen videos in slow motion, I guess, because when I then saw it in real life, it was way faster than I imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. When they want to, they can really move.
Yeah.
They're pretty speedy individuals. But yeah, something actually really interesting about the whale shark is their spot pattern. So each spot pattern is unique to the individual, which is super useful when we want to identify individuals within a population. So researchers aim to take a photograph of the left side of the gills, and then they use the spot pattern within that area as the kind of identifying feature. So they upload that to a database, and that database will tell the researcher if it's an individual that's been recorded previously, and then all the information associated with those sightings, or whether it's a brand new individual that's never been seen before.
Amazing. That's the same with manta rays, right? Their dots are also to identify or to easily identify them.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same as manta rays. The spot pattern on the belly versus the spot pattern on the gills.
Mm-hmm. And the last photo we have here is also taken by you. What shark is that, and what can you tell us about it?
These are black-tip reef sharks. I think they're probably the most common species that a person will see in their life. They are generally a very calm species. They're not going to attack anyone. And they're generally quite small as well. So they can reach 1.8 meters in length, 6 feet. And we're most likely to see them on coral reefs, as that's their main habitat. So yeah, we can see this image is a very small juvenile, likely to have been born very, very recently. And it's using this shallow bay as its nursery ground until it's large enough to move out onto the coral reef.
How big was it?
This one, I'd say maybe 0.7 meters, or maybe even smaller than that. It was a little baby.
That's good. Yeah, I couldn't really see how big it is because I don't know how big the rocks are.
Yes, true. Yeah.
As there are many different shark species, what role does genetic research play in understanding shark populations?
So when researchers analyze the DNA of different species, they can gain an insight into their evolutionary history, their population structure, and also the genetic diversity of the species. So it's possible to see whether populations within the same species are interconnected, or whether they actually remain isolated from each other. And this kind of information really helps conservationists develop their efforts and where management efforts should be focused. The same goes for migration. So if a species travels great distances to migrate, this helps researchers to identify key corridors and breeding grounds that need protection. I think one of the most interesting aspects of genetics, in my opinion, is identifying new species. And a lot of the time that's determining that individuals within a species already are actually genetically different enough to be classed as two distinct species altogether.
Why do sharks migrate?
So they can migrate, for example, to a specific breeding ground or mating ground. A lot of the time, researchers don't actually know why that area is specifically chosen for that. It must be something in its evolutionary history. But a lot of the time that area is different to where they spend the majority of their life cycle. So they'll make these kind of mass migrations to these areas purely to breed or to mate. And then that's where their young will use as a nursery ground.
And do sharks migrate from one ocean to another, or are just the same species living in different oceans?
Yes, so some sharks do actually migrate between oceans. So, for example, the great white shark migrates between South Africa and Australia, some individuals at least. And whale sharks have been known to travel across entire oceans, such as the Indo-Pacific. But these are often linked actually to plankton blooms and areas of high productivity.
And when thinking of sharks, do they also have personalities? Has any research been done on that?
So I think the popular thinking not that long ago was that sharks just always followed pure instinct. But recent studies have actually shown that sharks do exhibit different personalities sometimes. So Port Jackson sharks, under stress, some individuals would emerge from cover to explore new habitats, whereas others did not at all. And there's some amazing research being done in Bimini in the Bahamas, which shows that lemon sharks are actually highly social animals with complex social behaviors. And I think this is something that we're probably going to be hearing a lot more about in the future as more research comes out.
Interesting. And for people that are going diving or snorkeling or boating and they do see a fin or the whole shark, how can they easily identify the sharks?
So I think the best way would be to use field guides, which are online. Some of them are in apps. And these are really helpful tools because they can be region specific, which will help narrow it down for you initially. And then from there, you can look at the body shape, fin placement, the shape and the size of the shark, the shape of its head, coloration and any markings and patterns like the whale shark or the tiger shark. Size is also an important clue, along with its behavior and the habitat that you're seeing it in. So whether it's on a shallow reef or out in the pelagic, all those features can really help you to identify which shark you're seeing.
The ocean is facing a lot of stressors. What adaptations have helped sharks survive for hundreds of millions of years?
So they have actually been around longer than dinosaurs. That's why they're often described as living fossils. Sharks have amazing adaptations which have enabled them to survive through various mass extinction events. They have keen senses, exceptional sense of smell, acute vision, and the ability to detect prey through electroreception. So hammerheads, for example, they have a ton of ampullae of Lorenzini, which are electroreceptors, on the underside of their hammer, which means that they can detect electrical fields of other organisms, especially useful in sandy patches, for example. They can use their head. It's kind of a metal detector almost, and it will detect stingrays, for example, that are hidden in the sand. So sharks have a very efficient body design, making them effective predators, and their skeletons are cartilaginous. So that means they're very lightweight and flexible, which saves them a lot of energy and means they can change direction very quickly. Just some other adaptations. They have replaceable teeth, which is very useful. They have great buoyancy control, slow metabolism, so they don't have to be eating all the time. And of course, they have pretty good camouflage and counter shading, which either helps them to hide from larger prey or helps them to hunt their prey.
And about their teeth, is it like as humans, they just get a second pair of teeth, or if one falls out, one will just grow again?
Yeah, so if they fall out, basically the shark will just keep reproducing new teeth. It's not just that they have, for example, like humans, two sets of teeth, and when you're finished, that's it. They will just keep reproducing new teeth.
Very practical.
Very practical.
What are the greatest threats facing shark populations today?
So whilst all the traits we just talked about have enabled them to survive through all these mass extinction events, natural ones, I think now more than ever we are under enormous stress, and that is down to human-induced threats like overfishing. So sharks are targeted for their fins, their meat, their cartilage, as well as ending up in bycatch in large-scale fisheries like tuna. And it's actually estimated that 80 to 100 million sharks are killed globally each year. Of course, this could be much, much more. We just don't know. Sorry.
That's really a lot of sharks.
It's a scary amount. And then, of course, on top of overfishing, you have coastal development, pollution, destruction of their critical habitats, like their breeding grounds. We're having the loss of coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass. Then we have plastic pollution, heavy metals and other toxins that are washing in from the land and are accumulating in their bodies over time. We, of course, have ghost fishing gear, which can cause injury or death. Again, loss of prey. So maybe, they're struggling to feed. And then we have targeted culling, which we're actually seeing in some nations at the moment, which is a very worrying practice.
Yeah. And with the toxins that the sharks have to deal with, I imagine that's for other fish then too, and that doesn't really sound like it's healthy to eat fish then.
Exactly. So all fish will be taking this up into their bodies, but it accumulates as we move up the food chain. So, for example, smaller fish will have a little amount maybe, and as they get predated upon and consumed by a larger fish, this larger fish then accumulates all those toxins as well. So fish like tuna and, of course, sharks, they have a very high heavy metal content because they've accumulated all of those toxins that have been underneath them in the food chain. So again, that's something to consider when people are eating shark meat, that you are also consuming meat that is full of heavy metals.
Yeah. So definitely, besides that sharks are extremely important for the ocean ecosystem, to then just fish it to eat it doesn't make any sense if you're just doing harm to your body and to the ocean and the environment. So better not do it. But how does shark fin impact not only sharks but the whole marine ecosystem, as they are considered apex predators, as we just shortly said?
Yeah, so as we just mentioned, sharks often sit at the top or near to the top of marine food webs. So their role is to regulate the populations of their prey species, so preventing any one species from overpopulating and depleting the resources within that system. So when you remove sharks, you're disrupting this balance, and that causes what's called a trophic cascade that affects the entire ecosystem. So as an example, if you remove sharks, the number of mesopredators like grouper, that will grow. These grouper feed on parrotfish, and that reduces the number of parrotfish. Parrotfish graze on algae. So without the parrotfish to do that, the algae grows out of control and outcompetes all of the corals on the reef. And obviously we know that corals are super important for life on Earth. So this has a massive knock-on effect to the entire ecosystem.
And why are shark fins in such high demand, and what are they primarily used for?
So they're highly sought after for shark fin soup, which is a traditional dish in Chinese cuisine. The fin is used in the soup for texture, not for its flavour. And the fins are also falsely believed to have various health benefits.
What kind of texture does a shark fin have that they need that for texture and cannot use something else?
That's a really good question. I'd love that to be answered. I really am not sure why the texture is so appealing. As we know, it obviously has a very rough surface to the fins. But I couldn't tell you why that appeals.
Okay. And which shark species are most affected by shark finning? Do they have like a favorite fin to have in their soup?
So species with larger fins are generally targeted, but any shark species is at risk from the shark fin trade. Blue sharks and hammerheads have large, high-value fins. And then the long tails of some sharks are used, like thresher sharks. Mako sharks are also valued for their meat. So a lot of the time they'll have their fins taken and then their meat as well. And actually, sadly, whale sharks, whilst protected in many regions, are also sought after just due to the size of their fins. And it's actually thought that 73 million sharks are killed every year just for their fins.
That's a lot of sharks. Are there countries that have seen significant cultural shift away from eating shark fin soup and shark products in general?
Yeah, there's definitely been a shift away from eating shark fin soup in recent years. That's been driven by increasing awareness and pressure being placed on this practice. And actually in 2012, the Chinese government banned serving shark fin soup at their official state dinners, which is massive. And this sent a strong message to the rest of the country and helped reduce public demand for the soup. Other countries like Hong Kong and Taiwan have also made a move away from it. And that's been down a lot to NGOs having awareness campaigns and also celebrity and influencer impact, as well as some legislation changes as well.
We are currently in Europe, and shark fin soup is not really such a big topic here as it is in Asia, yet shark meat is still being sold here in restaurants and supermarkets. What are some ways consumers can identify and avoid shark products in disguise?
Yeah, we definitely still have to be careful in Europe and in the UK as well. So shark meat and other products are often sold under alternative names so that the consumer doesn't immediately recognize it as shark. So some to look out for would be mako, dogfish, whitefish, flake, or simply labeled fin. On from that, consumers can check for certifications that it's from a sustainable source, and also to check the country of origin against those countries that have lax shark fishing regulations. Another product that has been highly used in the past is squalene, which is made from shark liver oil, and it's in a ton of makeup beauty products, all sorts. But they've introduced more recently a plant alternative. So if you see a label with squalene on it, you can check to see if that's from shark or plants.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy where it can be found, and that they just use different names to irritate the consumer so they don't even know what they're buying. I'm pretty sure that some people wouldn't buy it if they would know that they're eating a shark. I think a little bit more work maybe has to be done there to educate the consumers as well. I think especially in Europe, we wouldn't think that there would be sharks in our supermarkets just under different names, and that in Europe they're also being fished, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that also needs to be put in place is legislation, so that shops and supermarkets need to have that transparency with their consumers, to actually make their consumers aware of what they're purchasing. There was a large expose in the UK a few years ago about the fish that was being used in fish and chip shops, and how no one was aware that it was sometimes shark meat. I think this legislation needs to be put in place so that people can make more informed choices.
How does CITES regulate the trade of shark species?
So CITES aims to provide a framework for monitoring and controlling trade in wild animals and plants, so as not to threaten their survival. And this includes shark species that are at risk from the shark fin trade and for their other body parts. So right now, I think over 140 species of sharks and rays are now listed on CITES Appendix 2. And Appendix 2 is trade that is controlled under specific conditions. And CITES is an international agreement between many governments, and that is enforceable by law, which is great.
Do you know if there are gaps in current legislations that leave sharks vulnerable?
Yeah, so while some sharks are protected through CITES, many are not. They remain completely unprotected from trade. In addition, where certain species can look alike or their fins are indistinguishable from each other when they're dried, listed species have kind of crept back into the shark fin soup trade. So a lot of the time, enforcement at the borders between countries can't actually determine what species they're looking at. Similarly, non-listed species are then being targeted more heavily, and that's leading to their decline because they're not protected. And again, with the illegal fishing trade, shark trade is really, really difficult to track and control.
Are there certain shark species more vulnerable to extinction than others?
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, the shark fin trade has a massive impact on that. The shark species that are more likely to be finned are obviously under massive threat from these fisheries that are targeting just their fins. But again, it really depends on the different shark species and their environments as to just kind of how impacted they are by other threats, again, like habitat destruction.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest factor why illegal shark finning continues despite international bans? I would say high economic demand for sharks still. And this incentivizes the illegal shark fisheries. So fins from, for example, the oceanic white-tip shark or the scalloped hammerhead,
these are really sought after species. These fins can fetch $500 to $1,000 per kilogram. And so for fisheries, especially smaller, more remote fisheries, it's an incredible amount of money for them. And on top of that, of course, there's the inadequate enforcement of regulations. Again, in illegal fisheries, it's impossible to monitor.
Yeah. What role would you say that NGOs and advocacy group plays in strengthening the shark protections?
They really have a vital role in raising awareness through campaigns and fighting against these myths and the stigma. And they can advocate for policy change as well, and legal reforms. So, for example, some NGOs have promoted certain species to be listed under CITES. So that pressure is really making a difference. Many NGOs are also conducting the vital research that is taking place, and that data is used to put conservation plans in place. They play a role in a lot of other aspects as well, engaging with local communities, capacity building, and also supporting local economies, for example, through the development of ecotourism practices.
That's good. And as a shark ecologist, what are the primary techniques you use to study sharks in the wild?
So I've used a variety of non-invasive techniques generally that allow data to be collected whilst minimizing the impact to sharks and of their environment. So probst, for example, are a method I've used across multiple projects on different species. So that, again, that's the rig with the camera and the bait bag. And this gives us an insight into which species and how many individuals are in the surrounding area, as well as allowing us to identify individuals in some cases, and gives us an insight into information on their behavior, population demographics, so whether it's a male, female, juvenile, adult, pregnant, for example. Tags are a very useful technique. So these are normally attached to the shark, either to the dorsal fin or surgically inserted just inside the skin on the underside of the shark. These tags track short or long-term movements and migrations of sharks. And these can be satellite tags. So these provide sometimes real-time information on their position, as well as archiving various movement data. So, for example, the speed of the shark, the direction, and the depth that they're diving to. So really interesting insights that we wouldn't normally get a chance to observe. And then you have acoustic tags, and that studies more the local movement patterns and residency of individuals within the population to a certain area. Drones are definitely a technique that's being used more and more in research now. Aerial surveys allow for observations without any disturbance to the species at all. And of course, the cost of a drone is likely much, much less than the cost of, for example, a satellite tag. eDNA is something that's becoming more prevalent as well. And this is basically testing the water column for traces of DNA that's been left there by species that have used that area recently. So again, completely non-invasive. And when I was working with Lamave, we would opportunistically sample whale shark poo. So basically, when we'd see that the whale shark was about to defecate, we'd see like a little wiggle. We would swim behind it to be in prime position. and we'd grab the poo, which would be the fecal sample in the end, swim up to the surface, swim back to shore, put it in a test tube, and these samples were sent back to a lab to analyse the whale shark's diet. So again, yeah, very novel idea.
And coming out of the water and of the depths, you're a drone pilot. Do you have any stories from the field about when using a drone and how it comes useful?
Yes, I've seen some incredible things on the drone. So in the Maldives, I was carrying out a drone survey over the reef with a guest from the resort I was working at. And I spotted an olive ridley turtle. And I noticed that it was entangled in something. So when I zoomed in, I could see that it was actually entangled in a very large aggregate net. So aggregate nets are a combination of different fishing gear that's entangled in itself across time. And that's something that I would never have spotted without a drone. So I was watching it being dragged backwards with the current, despite swimming against it. And you could see that it was really struggling. We launched a rescue mission, but by the time we'd found it, we could see that it had been at sea for months, entangled in this net. It was in terrible condition. It had cuts through 2 of its flippers, right down to the bone, where the net had entangled on the flippers. And, you know, it was just really, really sad to see. Similarly, in Thailand, I was flying the drone and I spotted an odd-looking baby black-tip reef shark. Initially, I thought that it might have 2 tails. I couldn't quite figure out what I was seeing. But when I zoomed in, I could see that the second object was actually a hook in its mouth that was trailing an algae-covered line all the way behind it and past the end of its tail. So this additional weight for a juvenile shark to carry around is going to be costing it energetically. So in that case, I reported it to a local research group who had permits to actually handle the sharks, so they could actually go to remove it. But these experiences kind of confirm just how at risk marine wildlife is to these threats, and often we don't even see it, we're not aware of it. But on a happier note, another day I was flying in the Maldives. I ended up filming a turtle that had very interesting coloration. And I spoke with a turtle vet called Dr. Minnie, who was working with Olive Ridley Project at the time. And she confirmed to me that the turtle, which was a hawksbill, was displaying leucism. So leucism is a condition where animals have reduced pigmentation, and this is often detrimental to their survival because in most cases it means that the turtle is not camouflaged as well as they usually should be, and they're often predated upon from a very young age. But she also confirmed that the individual I'd recorded was a sub-adult, and as far as we knew at the time of discovery, there hadn't actually been any observations of a leucistic hawksbill turtle reaching that life stage, only of hatchlings being born with it. So I would say that was a pretty exciting discovery, and again, would never have seen it without the drone. So I think it just proves what a useful tool it can be for research and conservation.
Yeah, definitely sounds useful. But you have to fly probably at quite a distance, right? Or is that just with like some species that hew really well, or is that more of a ball?
Yeah, so obviously you have to be aware that you're not disturbing the wildlife. So We found that dolphins were more aware than kind of any other creature we found on the reefs out there. So we make sure to fly at least 30 meters in height, if not higher. Then they weren't really aware. It also depends on the noise of the drone that you're using. And whether they can hear it. But we found that sharks and turtles were generally less receptive to the noise, but we'd always maintain that 30-meter height, just to kind of not encroach on their natural behavior.
Are there any ethical concerns or guidelines you must follow while conducting shark research?
Yes, so of course we want to minimize any stress to the animal and cause no harm. So where possible, non-invasive methods are preferred, but when that's not possible, for example, with tagging, there are guidelines to follow. So you want to minimize the time you're handling the shark, use proper tagging techniques. You can utilize what's called tonic immobility to reduce their stress response. So that is turning the shark upside down, and that kind of sends it into a trance-like state and dramatically reduces the amount of stress that's on the shark.
Okay. I was wondering in that one photo you showed why the shark is upside down.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise it would be stressed out. It would be trying to swim away. So by placing it kind of in that position, it means also that the researchers can work quickly and efficiently to get it done in as little time as possible, because the shark is pretty still, but it also means that it's reducing the amount of stress on the shark as well. So of course you want to observe the animal's welfare before you start, during and also after tagging. And you want to avoid disrupting their natural behavior. So tagging shouldn't interfere, for example, with their ability to feed afterwards. And then, of course, there's the compliance to local regulations, various permits that you might have, and also responsible communication to the public and the local communities. Otherwise, they might not have a clue what's going on and why they're seeing these sharks with tags attached. So, yeah, just responsible communication.
You just talked about the general public. What role does citizen science play in shark research?
It gives them a valuable insight and helps to scale research efforts that would otherwise be impossible for scientists to carry out on their own. So, for example, in the Cayman Islands, the project ran something called a shark logger network, and that was a reporting database that divers could submit their sightings to. And that would amount to hundreds of dives per year. So this data enables us to kind of gain a better insight into a larger geographical area, increased frequency, and also it involves local communities. So promoting shark conservation. If we're increasing public engagement, that's always great. And a lot of these divers were really interested to hear, just how many sharks are around the island and if they'd seen that specific individual before. So it really kind of fosters this community engagement that we really need for conservation.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have any success stories in mind where sharks were conserved?
Yeah, so obviously there are many organizations out there that are doing great work, but the ones that come to mind are Lamave. Their efforts have contributed to the protection of different critical habitats for sharks and the promotion of responsible shark tourism. So as is the case in the Philippines, whale shark tourism is very popular. So their guidelines have helped regulate that. And that's benefited both the sharks and the local communities. there is a project in Indonesia called Project Hiu, and they reduce the number of tiger shark fishing boats going out each month by offering alternative employment to the fishermen. So instead of fishing, the fishermen can take out tourists on shark snorkels and reef cruises. So they're still earning an income, they're just not fishing sharks. I would say in the UK, there is the Shark Trust, and they advocate for sustainable fisheries, and they engage in public education, which is super important. And not just groups, there's individuals too that have dedicated their lives to helping sharks. And one of those would be Christina Zanato. And she dedicates all of her time to removing hooks from Caribbean reef sharks in the Bahamas. So
she's sometimes diving with the all like metal suits, right?
With the suit, yeah, the chainmail.
The chain suit,
yeah,
yes.
I can imagine. I'd love to try that at some point.
Yeah, must be quite heavy though, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would you say how the general public can contribute to shark conservation efforts?
So there's a lot an individual can do. You can raise awareness, so you can spread the word by talking to family, friends, colleagues, use social media. You can make informed choices, so avoiding shark products, choosing sustainable seafood, participating in citizen science projects, so reporting shark sightings. There's one in the UK where you can report the mermaid's purses, the shark eggs, if you're going for a walk on the beach, for example. And support your conservation organisations however you can, whether that's donating or volunteering your time. Signing petitions, advocating for stronger laws and policy changes, that always puts pressure on lawmakers. And even on holiday, you can support the eco-friendly tour operators or those directly contributing to conservation. And then again, beach cleanups on your local beaches, reducing your plastic waste.
Yeah. You just talked a little bit about holiday, as a lot of people are afraid of sharks thanks to the great image that the media painted. Are the benefits of shark diving for conservation and public awareness? And what kind of diving would you say should not be allowed regarding potential dangers for both people and sharks?
Whilst there are concerns regarding the practice of shark diving, I'd say there's definitely some positives that we can find, including firstly changing people's perceptions. So when tourists and divers witness firsthand that sharks are actually just minding their own business and they're not at all bothered by humans, this can generally cause a big shift in attitude. On a completely different note, if some of the revenue generated by shark tourism is then going back into conservation and management, that's really positive. And these operations, these ecotourism operations, they often create opportunities for scientists to observe shark behavior, especially in regions where funding is limited. So it gives those groups additional data. And as I just mentioned, in some countries, we've seen that shark fishing can be replaced by shark diving or snorkeling. So that's always positive to provide shark fishermen with an alternative income. But of course, some operations are not safe for divers or for sharks. So something to look out for is baiting or feeding the sharks, which can lead to conditioned behavior. So then sharks start associating humans with food. And this can then lead to accidental bites. And it's also disrupting the shark's natural feeding behaviors. Cage diving is another interesting one. Without proper regulations and checks, the divers are not only sometimes at risk when they're in the cage, but there's also been incidents of sharks injuring themselves on poorly designed cages. So I think it's really important to make good choices, to choose ethical and safe tourism operations for your own experience, but also for the well-being of the sharks that you're there to see.
Yeah, definitely. We're already at my last question. I would like to ask for the viewers for advice if they are interested in starting a career like yours.
A career in shark science or conservation is incredibly rewarding, and I've loved almost every minute of it. But it does require passion and persistence. But I don't think you have to follow a set path or timeline to get into this area. Not all conservationists go to university. Some don't do the field work. It's really up to you what path you choose and what area you want to focus on. But I would say to prioritize practical experience, whether that is in the field with a research group or in a lab, dive school, or maybe gaining a degree. For me, I found that being scuba certified has helped me massively throughout my career. Being a dive master and having that level shows employers that you can look after yourself comfortably in the water, as well as collecting data at the same time. And the same goes for free diving. My work with whale sharks and blue sharks has required me to be comfortable diving to depths of around 10 meters to record the necessary data. Also contacts, building a network. I think this is super valuable. It's a great way to find new jobs and to chat to people in a similar path. So build a network, join marine science groups on social media, find mentors and collaborators that you can learn from. And I guess get comfortable as well with different software. I know that's not something that's talked about as like a highlight of shark research, but it's absolutely part of the research side of the job. And if we want to conserve shark species, we do need to analyze the data. So absolutely, if you're struggling with statistics, take extra courses. You'll get there in the end. So I would say be adaptable and give every opportunity your best go, because it's so worth it.
Well, thanks so much for that advice, and thanks so much for the whole conversation. It was super interesting. Now I hope to talk with you soon again, and maybe sometime in the future work with you on a project together. Thank
you so much, Sabine, for having me on your podcast. It's been so nice chatting with you.
Thank you, with you too.